Chapter 17 of The Gray Phantom by Herman Landon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Gray Phantom by Herman Landon. Chapter 17. Dr. Tagala's Discovery. A glance at his watch as he entered the secret room showed the phantom that daybreak was not far away. In a little while it would be highly unsafe for him to walk about the house. Besides, the execution of his next move depended for its success on darkness and quiet. To jeopardize his project by a reckless move would be the height of folly and might result in disastrous consequences. Much as his fears and anxiety urged him to immediate action, the phantom decided to wait till the following night. He lay down on the cot and slept by snatches. Now and then, as a faint but terrifying sound came down the ventilator shaft, he awoke with a start. Peals of unnatural laughter, sounding remotely in the darkness of the hidden chamber, started a cold sweat on his forehead. By sheer physical force he would shut out the sounds, knowing that for the present he could do nothing, but the mutterings that fell from his lips and the convulsive clenching of his hands boded no good for Mr. Shea and his followers. Morning came, and he tried to fix his mind on his forthcoming move. A grim look came into his face as he contemplated the step he was about to take. Ordinarily he would have shrunk from it in disgust, for it was an expedient he had never employed in the past. Now, however, with the life of Helen Hardwick in danger, he must employ whatever means might prove effective. It was no time for niceties or scruples. Besides, there was no reason why he should be restrained by ethical considerations when dealing with blackguards like Mr. Shea and his retainers. The hours dragged. A troubled look on his face, the phantom paced the floor of the narrow chamber. His plans for the night were complete except for one detail. Cudgel his brain as he might, there was one small but important matter that continued to puzzle him. Evening came, and the solution of the difficulty still eluded him. He was a little faint from hunger, for he had not eaten for 24 hours, and he wondered if his brain would not work better after a visit to the pantry. In a little while the house would quiet down for the night, and then he could safely leave his hiding-place. At last he was ready for action. He gave his automatic a careful inspection. Into his pocket he put a coil of thin but strong rope, which he had unearthed from an old chest. Then he turned off the light and ascended the spiral stairway. After listening in vain for sounds, he tiptoed out in the hallway, then down the main stairway. The entire house seemed immersed in sleep, and even the strained laughter had stopped for a time. Evidently the occupants of the house, never guessing that he was hiding in their very midst, supposed that the Gray Phantom had left Azure Crest. He felt more alert after gratifying his hunger in the well-stocked pantry. By the back stairway he returned to the second floor. Silent as a shadow, he walked down the hall, pausing briefly before every door and listening. It was important that he should locate Dr. Tagala's room, for his whole plan revolved around the scientist. Also, he was anxious to take the doctor completely by surprise. At one of the doors he stopped longer than before the others. A faint reek of chemicals filtered through the keyhole, and in a vague sense the odor suggested Dr. Tagala's nearness. Neither light nor sound came through the tiny opening, so evidently there was no one in the room. The door was locked, but a simple operation with one of the tools in his case opened it readily, and he stepped inside. He peered sharply into the darkness before he thought it safe to snap on his electric flashlight. As the small point of light played over floor and walls, He knew at once that the room was a chemical laboratory. Chemistry had always held a strong fascination for him, and his knowledge of the science was far more comprehensive than the average layman's. Something prompted him to glance twice at the long rows of bottles stacked on shelves around the room. Stepping closer, he read some of the labels, and suddenly he gave a faint chuckle of elation. The problem that had puzzled him all day was at last solved. From its place on the shelf he took a small bottle containing a colorless fluid and slipped it into his pocket. The chemical was a very ordinary one, but he expected it to serve a highly useful purpose. Again he darted the electric gleam over the room. At one side was a door, and as he bent his ear to the keyhole, he heard sounds of deep and regular breathing. Something told him that the sleeper was Dr. Tagala, for it seemed only logical that the scientist should occupy the room adjoining the laboratory. Quickly extinguishing his flashlight, he turned the knob and noiselessly pushed the door open, then stepped softly in the direction whence the sounds of breathing came. Once more he brought his flashlight into play, but only to assure himself by a swift glance that the sleeper was Tagala. A faint, triumphant grin curled his lips, and then the flash disappeared in his pocket. For a moment, standing in utter darkness, he tensed his muscles for action. In an instant he pressed his knee firmly against the sleeper's chest and wound his fingers tightly around Tagala's throat. A harsh rumble sounded in the doctor's windpipe, but the firm clutch over his Adam's apple prevented an outcry. He writhed, squirmed, doubled up his knees, and attempted to fight with his arms, but the phantom gradually increased the pressure on his throat, and his struggle grew feebler and feebler. Finally, when he was nearly exhausted, the phantom took out a cloth with which he had provided himself before leaving the secret room, and applied it as a gag. The doctor made only a feeble show of resistance while his arms and legs were bound, and finally the phantom took the limp form on his back and started from the room. Every inch of the way was beset with perils. A board creaking under the double weight of captor and captive might bring on a sudden attack, or one of the occupants of the house might be encountered in the hall. But luck was with the phantom, and in a short time he had placed his burden on the cot in the hidden chamber. Panting from the strenuous exercise, he removed the gag from his prisoner's mouth, then switched on the light. The doctor, breathing stertorously, his face almost black from the recent choking, wriggled his arms and legs in a futile effort to free himself. Seeing it was hopeless, he subsided and looked dazedly about him. His eyes opened wide as he saw the phantom. "You again?" he exclaimed. The phantom smiled at sight of his stupefaction. "You didn't suppose I would give up so easily, did you, Doctor? You don't seem particularly pleased to see me. No doubt you thought I left Azure Crest after the fizzle last night. I suppose you are wondering where you are. It is enough for you to know that you will never leave this room until we have had an understanding, and that for the present you may regard yourself as my prisoner. Your confederates will never find you, and you may as well reconcile yourself to the fact that they are unable to help you." Tagala, gradually recovering breath and wits, looked balefully at the phantom. You will suffer for this," he muttered thickly. Again he strained at the cords around his ankles and wrists, but he soon saw that it was useless. "We know how to deal with meddlers." The phantom smiled complacently. As yet it had not occurred to his prisoner to cry for help, and the phantom had no fear of the result if he should do so. Though Slade and the others were not far away, they were as harmless as if they did not exist. Save for the ventilating shaft, the room was practically soundproof, and the exits were so completely hidden that they would never be able to locate the chamber. "We shall see," was his calm response. "Mr. Shea appears to be a very shrewd man, but even he has his limitations. The infirmities of age are beginning to show a marked effect on his strategy. He is too old for this sort of thing." "So," said the scientist in queer tones, "you think you know him?" The phantom nodded. "I had an encounter with him some years ago, and he proved to me then that he had extraordinary astuteness. As a matter of fact, he was a little too much for me. The other day I ran into him by accident, and we had quite a pleasant little chat." Tagala lay motionless on the cot, while his eyes, slowly recovering their customary brilliance, searched the phantom's face. "The police are laboring under the delusion that you are Mr. Shea," he dryly observed. "Oh, well, the police are not particularly bright at times." The phantom shrugged. "Now, Doctor, you and I are going to have a very serious talk. I was outmaneuvered last night, but this is my round. I shall convince you by a very simple method that it will be wise for you to place the antidote in my hands." Despite his humiliation and physical discomfort, the doctor gave a contemptuous laugh. "Fool!" he snorted. "Every move you make is foredoomed to failure. We have provided against every possible emergency. Our plan is already a certain success. Only this afternoon Mr. Shea telephones me from New York that everything is going well. A group of the most celebrated physicians in America have held several consultations without practical results. They are utterly at a loss to diagnose the disease or to prescribe even a palliative. Poor idiots! It took me years to perfect the toxin, and they have only a few days in which to combat its effects. On the 7th day after the inoculation, the 7 subjects will be doomed unless the antidote is administered in the meantime. After the 7th day it will be too late. Mr. Shea told me that 2 of the subjects are already in a mood to discuss terms. Perhaps by tomorrow they will place half of their fortunes at Mr. Shea's feet." "You seem very confident of success," observed the phantom. "Our success is already assured. In a few days I shall be wealthier than I ever before dreamed of being. Some people scoff at money, but it is an excellent thing for all that. All my life, while pursuing my scientific investigations, I have had my eye on what you Americans call the main chance. I never dreamed that I should realize my hopes through an accidental discovery. Ever hear of the datura plant?" The phantom shook his head. "It grows in great profusion in my native soil, the Malay States, but it can be transplanted or produced almost anywhere. It is an odd plant, from 4 to 6 feet high, with wide-spreading branches and black flowers that are shaped like trumpets. Children have been known to die after eating the seeds, which are very poisonous. A few years ago, after an extensive tour in Europe, I returned to my native land and was called upon to treat a child who had eaten a great quantity of the seeds. It was then I made the discovery that shall make me a wealthy man in a few days. It was a mere accident, but isn't our whole life a series of accidents?" He smiled philosophically, for he had quite recovered from the effects of his recent humiliation. "If you will permit me to explain a little further," he went on, "I think you will understand how invincible we are and how foolish it is for you to oppose us. The poisonous property of the datura plant is known as daturin. It is a very curious drug. Its active principle is a mixture of a kind of atropine and hyoscyamine, but the true nature of the component alkaloids has never been fully determined. It is one of the mysteries of nature. Among the symptoms of datura poisoning are hoarseness, dryness of the mouth, dilation of the pupils, disturbed heart action, bad memory, and a curious vocal affection that produces involuntary laughter. No chemical antidote has been either known or suggested until I made my accidental discovery. It has suited my purpose to keep that discovery to myself." There was an elated smirk on his face, and the phantom turned away in disgust. "I came to America," continued the doctor in oily tones, "and by mere chance made the acquaintance of our remarkable Mr. Shea. I shall not weary you by reciting all the details. I happened to mention my discovery to Mr. Shea, and his brilliant mind immediately conceived the idea of putting it to a highly profitable use. Like all great things, his plan was simplicity itself. His theory was based on the fact, so aptly stated by yourself last night, that the average run of mortals can be most effectively controlled through the factor of fear. He suggested that if a deadly malady were communicated to a number of wealthy men, they could easily be persuaded to pay almost any price for a sure antidote, especially if the antidote were the exclusive property of an individual or an organization. That was the beginning of the idea. It required quite a little elaboration. The chief factors in the plan were the poison and the antidote. The antidote was in readiness, but the poison had to be so adjusted that it would produce death within a specified time, unless the antidote were administered meanwhile. If the plan was to succeed, we must be in a position to tell the subjects that they would die within a certain number of days, unless they paid our price for the antidote. You probably know, since you appear to be an educated man, that the ancient Chinese knew how to adjust poisons so as to produce death within a certain time. All my life I have been making special studies along that line, and my discoveries proved very valuable in connection with Mr. Shea's project. Yet for a long time I was unable to adjust the poison with sufficient accuracy. With Mr. Shea's assistance, I fitted up a laboratory here and began making additional researches. It was necessary to have human subjects for the experience, and Mr. Shea furnished me several. 2 or 3 who were inoculated in the early stages of the work failed to react properly to the antidote, and 1 or 2 of them were unfortunate enough to die." "You murdered them, in plain words," suggested the phantom curtly. "Harsh words, my dear Gray Phantom. As a whole, the experiments were highly successful. I discovered how to adjust the poison so as to produce death within a specified time. We were now ready to go ahead with the plan. Mr. Shea selected the victims, and I showed a number of his most trusted men how the poison was to be injected. Each of these, with an assistant, was assigned to one of the 7 victims chosen by Mr. Shea, and the whole number of inoculations were successfully accomplished the other night. In a few days—" "What about Miss Darrow?" inquired the phantom brusquely. "What did you gain by murdering her?" "Really, I wish you would drop that unpleasant word from your vocabulary. Miss Darrow had been unfortunate enough to learn certain facts which were detrimental to Mr. Shea. She had been watched constantly, and she was followed to the Thelma that night. Her actions were peculiar, and Mr. Shea's agents suspected she was on the point of making embarrassing revelations. I was in New York at the time, and happened to be within reach, so the agents communicated with me. I arrived just in time to prevent unpleasant consequences. In another moment she might have made some very damaging disclosures. In fact, she had already sent a peculiarly worded note to that remarkable person whose name eludes me." "Vincent Starr?" suggested the phantom. "Precisely. Mr. Starr is one of your highly temperamental geniuses. Just how much Miss Darrow had learned will never be known, but I thought it advisable to act promptly. The amount of poison I injected into her veins was carefully calculated to produce death within a few minutes." The phantom mastered his sense of loathing. What he was learning might prove highly useful later on. "Wouldn't a knife thrust have been quicker and safer?" he suggested. "Even in the few minutes between the inoculation of the poison and Miss Darrow's death, she might have blurted out all she knew." "There was slight danger of that. The poison always blunts one's mental faculties, especially when given in such a large dose. It was very unlikely that Miss Darrow would speak coherently in the brief interval when the poison acted. A quick thrust with a knife would perhaps have been safer, but we needed the moral effect." "The what?" The satisfied gleam in the doctor's eyes testified that he was quite at ease once more, despite the cords that incapacitated him for action. "Yes, the moral effect was valuable. You see, the 7 victims selected by Mr. Shea had to be impressed with the deadliness of the poison. Unless they were thoroughly convinced that the poison would kill, they might not have been amenable to reason. Miss Darrow's death, coming just a day or two before the 7 were inoculated, was a valuable object lesson." An oily smile creased the scientist's swarthy features. Once more, despite his uncomfortable position, he seemed hugely content. "No doubt," admitted the phantom ironically, "Mr. Shea doesn't seem to have overlooked anything. What I can't understand is why you, a man of scientific attainments, should consent to do the bidding of such a blackguard." "Wealth is a very excellent thing," said Tagala musingly. "It is even more desirable than fame. Mr. Shea has put me in the way of acquiring a great fortune, so why should I not serve him?" "And what are you going to do with the money after you have acquired it by such vile methods, granting that your scheme succeeds?" "Enjoy life, my friend." The doctor's repulsive features were wreathed in smiles. "I have a great capacity for appreciating the beautiful things in life. Nature works by contrasts. She treated me very shabbily as far as physical characteristics are concerned, but by way of compensation she gave me a taste for the only things that really matter. I intend to surround myself with luxuries that an Indian Maharaja might envy. I intend to feast my eyes on the costliest and the best the world can produce. Now perhaps you understand?" The phantom nodded. Inwardly he tingled and glowed, but his face showed nothing but boredom and disgust. The insight he had just obtained into Tagala's character would have an important bearing on his plan. "And now that we understand each other," the doctor continued, "let us terminate this rather dreary farce. This little room is pleasant enough, but I never sleep well in strange places, and these cords are not inducive to repose. You will be free to go wherever you please as soon as we have settled the little matter I mentioned a moment ago." "Ah, then you persist in your foolish determination. Your experience last night should have convinced you of the futility of your efforts, but I see you are as stubborn as ever." "More so," the phantom assured him. "I have discovered a new weapon since last night. Before you leave this room, you will have told me where the antidote is hidden." Tagala grinned insolently. He tilted his head back against the pillow and complacently regarded the phantom. "You are very amusing," he murmured. "I thought that—" He stopped and looked toward a corner of the ceiling. The phantom followed his glance and his figure tensed perceptibly. From somewhere above their heads came strains of soft, lilting laughter, edged now and then with a hysterical vibration. A pallor began to spread over the phantom's face. "There, my dear gray phantom," said the doctor elatedly, "is your answer." The phantom clenched his fingers spasmodically. His face was hard and his eyes held a strange gleam. "You are mistaken, Doctor." He clipped off the words with sinister precision. "Until a moment ago I had silly scruples about employing my latest weapon. After hearing that," and he inclined his head toward the corner of the ceiling, "I have concluded that any methods are fair when dealing with scoundrels of your type." "That is obviously true," assented Tagala cheerfully. "The only difficulty is that any methods you employ are certain to prove ineffective. Please don't make any more threats against my life. I should laugh, and that would be impolite." The phantom came a step nearer the cot. "No," he said grimly, "I have no intention of doing anything so futile. I have the best reason in the world for not wanting you to die just yet. Also, I have discovered a much more effective way of dealing with you." An odd emphasis in his tones seemed to impress the doctor. A flicker of uneasiness crossed his face, but it was gone in a moment. "Ah," he murmured derisively, "I might have foreseen it. You mean to force me to surrender the antidote by torturing me. It is an improvement on your previous method, but it will prove just as useless. Torture is unpleasant, but I can endure any amount of it." "Mistaken again, Doctor. Torture is a little too crude, and I am not sure you are the type of man that could be influenced by it. The plan I have in mind is subtler and surer. You told me a moment ago that your highest aim in life is the employment of beautiful things and the pursuit of pleasure." "I told you the truth." This time there was a trace of bewilderment in Tagala's tones. From his pocket the phantom drew the bottle he had taken from the laboratory. He studied the label with a preoccupied air, then held it so the man on the cot could read the inscription. Tagala's eye narrowed in perplexity. "I have been told," said the phantom casually, "that a single drop of this fluid, when injected into the eye, is sufficient to cause blindness." The doctor's hands and feet strained spasmodically against the cords. A quick muscular contraction told that the phantom had found his sensitive spot. "Blind men are not particularly appreciative of the luxuries and pleasures you so vividly described a while ago," the phantom went on. His voice was soft, but there was a faint throb to his tones. "What good will it do a man to accumulate costly and beautiful things if he can't see them?" A grayish tinge crept into Tagala's face. His eyes, with a look of horror lurking in their depths, were fixed rigidly on the phantom's face. The phantom held the bottle to the light. A faint but ominous smile was playing about his lips. "Just a drop of colorless liquid," he murmured. "But what a different complexion it would put on your prospects, Tagala. All the money you hope to get through Mr. Shea would be only so much rubbish. All the wealth in the world couldn't relieve your misery. Don't you think you had better reconsider?" The scientist's lips fluttered, but no words came. A look of abhorrence accentuated the repulsiveness of his face. With a quick movement the phantom stepped toward the cot. The doctor wiggled and squirmed, but was unable to move. "Perhaps, just to convince you that I am in earnest, I had better begin by blinding the left eye now," the phantom went on, bending slightly over the trembling man. With 2 fingers of one hand he pressed back the lids of the doctor's left eye while holding the bottle in the other. The scientist rolled from side to side, but the firm pressure of the phantom's knee against his chest checked his efforts. Finally, as the phantom was tilting the little bottle against the exposed eye, a great sigh of horror broke from the doctor's lips. "Stop!" he cried, almost overcome by terror. "You have won. I will do anything you demand. Only don't blind me." End of chapter 17. Recording by Roger Moline.